Hi again. We're in Laurence Moore's essay on spiritualism and its influence in the middle of the 19th century in America. Moore goes on, men and women in the 19th century who embraced spiritualism as a religion time and again expressed angry perplexity over the type of opposition which their views aroused among Christian church groups. Charges of theological heresy were one thing, accusations that spiritualism led to insanity, drunkenness, and broken homes were another. When an editorial in Harper's Weekly called on officials to close down the spirit circles as they did the gambling dens and other places of ill fame, the Banner of Light insisted on the deep commitment of spiritualists to morality. Spiritualism teaches love, charity, and goodwill to man and forgiveness of injuries, that article said. It conjures up no awful visions of the future, of burning lakes and pitfalls. It tells of an eternal progression in all that is bright and pure and beautiful until the soul becomes a part of the glorious harmony of God. That's a direct quote from Banner of Light. The God of orthodoxy, that devil creator, plaguer of the human race, framer and jailer of hell, and tormentor of the damned, excited neither reverence nor love. Spiritualism, in contrast, opened men's hearts to the sunshine and the songs of birds, the sound of purling brooks, the joy of the living word ripening in God's smile. Professional mediums might betray moral lapses, but so did Mary Magdalene. It was not the fat and sleek priests who could expect angel visits, but the downtrodden and unhappy. The latter always first saw the truths of a new religion. Despite these defenses, however, major church journals, bolstered by a flood of denominationally inspired pamphlets, expressed alarm at the dangerous delusions of spiritualism, revulsion at its moral abominations, and fear that the devil might be launching a campaign to promote atheism across the land. The many assaults on spiritualism as a serious threat to American culture grew out of a troubled mentality. On intellectual grounds, Christian churchmen saw spiritualism as one more evidence of impending social anarchy. And on lower psychic levels of insecurity, they wondered whether they could hold their position against its claims. The religious groups that attacked spiritualism most fiercely were, not surprisingly, those that still had a lively fear of the devil in the mid-19th century. Seventh-day Adventists, who, like the spiritualists, date their origins to the period just before the Civil War, and Roman Catholics. So the Adventists and Roman Catholics formed the two religious groups most conspicuously predisposed to believe in the factual claims that spiritualists were pressing on the public. From their point of view, only the spirits who put on the displays at seances had evil origins. The legitimate spirit mediators between God and man, and both Adventists and Catholics believed that they did exist, were far fewer in number and much more particular about the people through whom they communicated. Aside from their theological opposition, Catholics and Adventists probably had some cause to fear the competition of the spiritualists. This is a difficult matter to prove. The Adventists did lose several of their leading members to the spiritualist camp, although one of them, Moses Hull, proceeded to embarrass his early spiritualist sponsors by editing a free love newspaper. Margaret Fox and D.D. Home, the two most famous American mediums in the 19th century, made celebrated conversions to Catholicism and then lapsed back into infidelity. The permanent conversion to Catholicism of two other American spiritualists, Dr. T.L. Nichols and his wife Mary Gove Nichols, offers some indication that widely divergent theologies may nonetheless have overlapping appeals. The Roman Catholic ban on seance attendance may rest as much on awareness of that fact as on the Church's determination to shut down Satan's telegraph. The Catholic Church never had to worry about large numbers of defections to the spiritualists, but, interestingly, one official of the National Spiritualist Association in this century estimated that about 50% of its membership was formerly Catholic. Swedenborgians were a less likely source of opposition to spiritualism in the mid-19th century. For Swedenborg himself had freely conversed with spirits. Many of the new spirit messages being relayed to American mediums repeated the teachings of Swedenborg generally and in detail. Nevertheless, the American Church of the New Jerusalem spent more energy assailing spiritualism than any group except the Adventists, and its reasons were similar to the Adventists. It accused spiritualists of materialism and objected to their lack of both a personal God and a divine Christ. His American followers depicted Swedenborg as a sanctified vessel who had warned quite strongly against the casual spirit communication that spiritualists sought daily. As with Catholics and Adventists, Swedenborgians also had cause to worry about defections to the spiritualists. Andrew Jackson Davis, whose early mediumship reflected a heavy debt to the teachings and career of Swedenborg, never was happy with what he called the phenomenalist wing of the spiritualist camp. While he believed in spirit voices, his fear that spiritualism was turning into a form of cheap entertainment nearly led to his complete severance of ties with the movement. The clergy of the major Protestant denominations at the time of the Civil War were less sure about the reality of spirits and the devil. Most doubted whether such forces, even if real, could be detected in the ways described in spiritualist literature. However, Protestants had clear theological reasons to oppose spiritualism, as well as their own insecurities. The sectarian fever that ran across pre-Civil War America contributed to the atmosphere which made spiritualism seem dangerous. While the proliferation of new religious denominations may have increased church membership, it threatened to splinter the effective social control that churches could exercise. Protestant clergymen in 1850 were already worried about the possible undermining of social morality because of the decline of hell in the popular imagination, and the spiritualist version of a revelation that was dispensed promiscuously through all social classes could only add to the problems of social disruption. Austin Phelps, a professor emeritus of Andover Theological Seminary, whose father's house had been haunted by a poltergeist, made his concern explicit. Admitting that the popular faith in the supernaturalism of the Bible is passing through a transition, he wondered whether there might be a way back to a full reliance on scriptural authority. Phelps was prepared to give Protestants back their devil if that was what it took to stem the extensive and still growing delusion of spiritualism. Phelps' concern that Americans were accepting the concreteness of spirits as a substitute for biblical literalness bothered other evangelical Protestants. By the mid-19th century, the authority of Christian scripture was running into trouble in ever-widening circles. The transcendental emphasis on intuitive evidence posed only one problem, and geographically it was a fairly local one. The Unitarians at Harvard, who deserved their trouble, could worry about transcendentalists. On the other hand, all Protestant theologians, under the pressures of new critical and historical analysis of the Bible, as well as new geological evidence about the age and development of the earth, had to face the possibility that parts of their scripture were mythical or merely wrong. But if the Bible was shaky in part, and if some Christian doctrines, miracles, the virgin birth, flew in the face of reason and the increasing emphasis of science on the regular order of nature, then what justified the authority of the whole? It became increasingly difficult as the 19th century wore on for Protestants to certify biblical miracles while falling over one another to insist on the absolute orderliness of natural law in modern times. Hiram Corson, a professor of English at Cornell University, who over many years communicated with spirits in the Ithaca area, posed a slightly different version of the dilemma. Strange indeed, he wrote, is the attitude the Christian church now takes in regarding the exhibition in these days of the very spiritual gifts which especially characterized primitive Christianity as the work of the devil. Because spiritualism got its start in Hydesville, New York, historians have been in the habit of overlooking or misconstruing its historical significance. Spiritualism did show traces of its regional origins, and it by no means lacked characteristics of other religious movements that spread through the so-called burned-over district. It shared with Millerism and Mormonism, for example, a religious imagination that was graphic and literal. The plain people of Western New York responded to visual, exactly measured detail, and it really did not matter whether the subject was hell, the Second Coming, the New Jerusalem, or the spirit world. Mormons and spiritualists alike had a passion for collecting witnesses to certify the facts of their faith. Both in their own way strove after a religion of eternal progression, whose evidences, however strange they might seem on first telling, fell entirely within the domain of advancing science. A comparable interest in outward physical signs was evident in other ways in the successive waves of Protestant revivals that gave the burned-over district its name. A saint rolling in the dust gave evidence of spiritual presence as surely as a symphony of raps. All such phenomena attested to the daily intrusion of the unseen world into the seen. In addition, Christian revivalism and spiritualism both fell under the influence, though certainly with different emphases, of notions of human perfectionism, and spiritualism surely owed aspects of its anti-clericalism and anti-denominationalism to the revivals. Moreover, fresh revelation, of which the Spirit messages were one example in antebellum America, seemed to spring up everywhere that revivalism penetrated. Finally, the spiritualists caught some of the apocalyptic mood of millennialism. They did, after all, announce a new dispensation, though without the urgency others felt in preparing the way for the Lord. I'll put in a link to a disturbing, even scary parallel between the teachings of one spiritualist, much later in the 1920s and 30s, Johannes Graeber, and the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses. How is it that the spirits who communicated with Graeber and his medium wife gave a set of doctrines to Jehovah's Witnesses were almost identical in substance to what Graeber and his wife received from the spirits?